One of the most frustrating and probably underrecognized aspects of ADHD is this mismatch that we tend to have between the ideas that we can come up with and our ability to actually execute and implement those ideas. People with ADHD tend to be really creative, and part of that is because our minds are constantly bouncing from one thing to the next. Like, we're just statistically more likely to come up with something interesting because we're thinking about all of these different things all the time. But then when we think about kind of taking those ideas that we have and translating them into something in real life, we struggle with things like forgetting the idea that we had, or struggling to figure out, like, what are the steps to go from point A to point B to point C? Or how can we think about what we want to do and break it down into smaller tasks so we can actually start taking action? Or how can we start to approach this task in a way that doesn't feel super intimidating so we actually make progress instead of getting stuck in perfectionism and not moving? And then we also tend to have trouble filtering out the ideas that maybe aren't so great and holding on to the ones that are pretty good without forgetting them. So I think this is part of the reason that we end up with like a bunch of different to-do lists and a bunch of different web pages, tabs open on our internet browser. Like, we don't want to forget it, so we come up with all these external reminders, and then of course that ends up being more frustrating because it's cluttery and you just can't think as well. Anyways, I feel like I'm just kind of describing the life cycle of like an ADHD idea right now. But all of this to say, I want you to know, if this is something you struggle with, if you're like an idea person, you get really frustrated with yourself because you can't actually implement those ideas, or you find it really difficult to do that, sometimes it's an ADHD thing, and you can give yourself a little bit more self-compassion for that if you know that that's something that you struggle with. It does kind of help, I think, to think of your mind as like this great idea generator. Like, it's super exciting, it's creative, but maybe you're not going to act on every single thing that comes across your mind. So I do think it can be helpful to have things like, a notepad on your desk where you can jot down the ideas that come up while you're supposed to be focusing on something else. You don't want to jot down a lot of detail, just enough to like jog your memory later on if you need to go back to doing what you were doing. But it can be nice to have those external reminders because we do tend to forget things. Our minds are bouncing from one thing to the next. So all of this also means that we may need to come to terms that we need more help from other people. I know it's really hard for me to say, and I struggle with this all the time. But you may have all of these wonderful ideas and get really excited about implementing them, but you may need some more of different skill sets to be able to help you do that. You may need more of these sort of executive functioning heavy skill sets, and that's okay. Even if you don't end up working with the person on the idea that you're talking to them about, just talking about the ideas, talking about them out loud when you have ADHD can be very like clarifying, and can also help you kind of look at the big picture and start to break it down into smaller pieces so that you can move forward and start to implement those ideas. So anyways, if this is stuff you want to talk more about, let me know. I know it's frustrating. I feel like I struggle to even kind of put it into words and describe like what this feeling is like. So I'm interested to know if it resonates with you guys, if you felt the same thing.